Welcome to the Health Fix podcast, where health junkies get their weekly fix of tips, tools, and techniques to have limitless energy, sharp minds, and fit physiques for life. Hey, health junkies. On this episode of the Health Fix podcast, I'm interviewing Dr. Nathan S. Bryan. He is an expert and researcher who's dedicated his life to researching nitric oxide. So, if your energy's dropping, your workouts feel harder, or your recovery just isn't what it used to be from your workouts or hikes or bikes, it might be more than aging. It could be your nitric oxide levels. Now, nitric oxide is what keeps your blood flowing, your brain sharp, and your cells energized. But by age 40, most of us are making less than half of what we need. And that decline drives inflammation, fatigue, and even sexual health issues. Now, I would venture to say it even can drive what's going on with little aches and pains in the body that we kind of brush off, and even stuff that has to do with the gut. So, I'm joining Dr. Nathan S. Bryan to really break down how to restore this molecule of nitric oxide naturally and what's missing in that link between circulation, longevity, and vitality that nitric oxide can really fill. Now, he is an international leader in nitric oxide biochemistry and molecular medicine. He was the first to identify nitrite and nitrate as indispensable nutrients for cardiovascular health and discovered the endocrine function of nitric oxide. Now, he's published numerous articles and he's highly cited in scientific papers. He has 6 books. We'll talk about those. And he's led multiple clinical trials, including nitric oxide based therapies. He is also the founder, chairman, and CEO of Bryan Therapeutics Incorporated, a biotechnology company that is dedicated to developing nitric oxide drugs for heart disease, Alzheimer's, diabetic ulcers, and wound healing. And today we talk a little bit about that FDA process that he is in right now. His consumer nitric oxide products, however, can also be found online. He has created some lozenges that are quite impressive for helping with vitality and sexual health. And those can be found over at n101.com or no2u.com. They're also on Amazon. And we'll have all of that in the podcast notes at drjkrausend.com. I am excited to talk with Dr. Nathan S. Bryan, and I'm also really excited to introduce you to him. He took some time out of his really busy schedule from filming a documentary called The Health Secrets, so you might hear a little background noise. He was in a hotel for the filming, so there's a little noise in the background, and I was showing up in my office due to some things I was up to during the recording as well, so it's a little different of a podcast for everyone. All right, well, let's introduce you to Nathan S. Bryan. All right, and we're off. Dr. Nathan Bryan, welcome to the Health Fix podcast.
Thanks, great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I'm glad that you're here. Have lots of questions about nitric oxide, and you fit in some time with a documentary that you're there to film in Austin area called Health Secrets. So this is exciting. We're gonna have to be on the lookout for that. We'll pop that in the podcast notes. Sure. So give us a little background in terms of what do you love so much about nitric oxide? If you had to give me like a 2-second statement, maybe that's a little short. Let's give you like a quick statement of like, what is your most favorite thing about nitric oxide?
Yeah, so my nitric oxide are elevator pitch, right? No, like it's the most important molecule produced in the human body, and the functional loss of nitric oxide is the earliest event in the onset progression of age-related chronic disease. So if we can figure out how to restore the natural production of nitric oxide, we can address the onset and progression of chronic disease.
Nice. Well, I always ask that of folks when we're talking about certain molecules, because I think I want to kick it off right off to see, to kind of set the tone. And for when we're talking about chronic disease, we're talking about aging, inflammaging. That concept for a lot of folks is hot and let's say relevant, but I don't think a lot of folks really understand what's happening when we're going into the process of inflammation and how nitric oxide ties into the whole aging process.
Well, when we look at age-related chronic disease, there's always 4 common denominators. There's always reduced blood flow to the organ. there's runaway inflammation, as you discussed, there's oxidative stress, and there's immune dysfunction. And so what we're finding is that it's the loss of nitric oxide that leads to all of this. So nitric oxide is a vasodilator. If we lose the ability to produce nitric oxide, we get constricted blood vessels, we get microvascular dysfunction. That leads to ischemia and hypoxia. We get runaway inflammation. There's an upregulation of adhesion molecules in the lining of the blood vessel. We have oxidative stress. We get an overproduction of NADPH oxidase. Electron transport chain becomes uncoupled and produces superoxide. And then we get immune dysfunction. And to the contrary, if we can restore the natural production of nitric oxide or give nitric oxide, we dilate blood vessels, we inhibit inflammation, we inhibit the oxidative stress, and we correct the immune dysfunction. So this single molecule addresses the root cause of chronic disease.
It makes sense. And of course, being an acupuncturist myself, I've always heard all of my docs in training telling me like circulation. And even the Chinese clearly knew there was something to this circulation. They maybe didn't say nitric oxide as part of it, but they knew there was something to this circulation thing.
Well, they call that qi, right? I mean, it goes back thousands and thousands of years. There's this gas that animates the human. And I published a paper in 2011 where we described that the qi that's been described by thousands of years is actually nitric oxide gas. And so that explains, and things that stand the test of time, like acupuncture, they stand the test of time because they're very effective.
Absolutely. And using acupuncture with nitric oxide, I've seen the benefits. And this is something while I don't do any research in my office, I can definitely say that my mind is looking at all the things and putting them, components together and going like, yes, this is something we need to keep on board. Yes, I see better results with that. Do you guys have acupuncturists that work with you that do provide feedback that folks could look at? Do you have some white papers or articles or whatnot in that case?
We don't have any, to answer your question, yes. We have a number of different healthcare practitioners, from acupuncturists, chiropractors, medical doctors, DOs. I mean, it spans the spectrum of practitioners. And so we've done randomized placebo-controlled clinical trials and looking at clinically relevant endpoints, but we never have really done a controlled clinical study in acupuncture. It's going to be interesting to see what's a relevant, and I don't know enough about it, so what's a relevant endpoint we could capture and publish in a paper or even create a white paper with.
I would wonder if, by any chance, like going back to the nervous system, going back to cardiovascular system, if a monitor of HRV in the moment, since we can monitor HRV, watching in like a workout with a particular watch, I wonder if by any chance having them with a watch on HRV and then pre and post checks with the nitric oxide on board. I don't know. We might be creating a research study.
No, for sure. No, we have that. We've used HRV as a measurement and an endpoint, not really a primary endpoint, but secondary endpoints in clinical studies. Nitric oxide has a really profound effect on HRV.
I like that you mentioned that about the HRV in particular, because I think it's one of, even though it's not a primary, as you say, like endpoint, it is something that a lot of people are coming to look at and realizing like, okay, I need to look at this. I need to see the long game on it. What's happening? Tell us a little more about what you have seen with the use of nitric oxide over time and adjustments with HRV.
Well, we know if we deliver nitric oxide, we can dilate blood vessels, we can normalize blood pressure in hypertensive patients or patients with an elevation in blood pressure. If you have normal or low blood pressure, there's no blood pressure lowering effect, which is very important. We know we can reduce inflammation. In fact, I have a number of patents on the method of reducing inflammation. We can normalize triglycerides. Patients have a triglycerides greater than 150. They see about a 27% reduction in 30 days. Again, we have a patent on correcting hyperlipidemia. What else? We see a mobilization of stem cells.
Nice.
We see an improvement in vascular function, with a 20% improvement in endothelial function within 20 minutes of taking my lozenge. Peripheral neuropathy. What else? Remediation of kidney disease. We stopped spilling protein in the urine. In one clinical pediatric case, we saw a resolution of heart disease within 5 months. We see about 11% plaque regression in the carotid arteries after 6 months.
Wow.
That's just a small one we've been able to demonstrate.
Right, right. I've seen all kinds of different things and turning around. And one of our big things here at the practice up in Wisconsin is we work with a lot of Lyme patients and see a lot of neuropathy from Lyme. And so I, look at it as one of our adjunct tools to kind of help along with the process. What have you seen personally in your guys' research looking at Lyme in particular?
Well, it's a complicated disease. A lot of times it's underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed. But with any disease, there's always a vascular component. And people who have poor circulation are typically more susceptible to not only Lyme infections, but other pathogens. Because poorly vascularized tissues are more susceptible to infections. And part of our innate immune system is going to that site of infection. Our macrophages and neutrophils produce a lot of nitric oxide, and if it's a bacterium, it binds to the iron sulfur centers. The bacteria shuts down their respiration. If it's a virus, it prevents the virus from replicating. But if that person has vascular complications or can elicit an immune response, then they become susceptible to those infections. So that kind of explains the risk of certain patients get Lyme or other infections. But I think the remediation process, nitric oxide, can certainly help, because we're going to fully oxygenate that tissue, we're going to dilate the blood vessels, we're going to recruit capillaries, we're going to activate an immune response, and we're going to help with the detox, killing the pathogen and eliminating the toxic metabolic byproducts of those infections.
It makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense to have it as part of the whole protocol. And this is something that we do look at here as well. Another thing that I kind of gave you a little pre knowledge on this one, that I was going to ask this one, but I also in my Washington state practice see a lot of women for hormone issues. And one of the big things that of course we see with circulation of blood flow, with men, we've got erectile dysfunction. With women, we also do have erectile dysfunction that we're not really talking about the circulation to the clitoris. We're not talking about circulation even to the labia. And with the skincare products where like your serums that you have the nitric oxide, I'm going, why are we not talking about this for the vaginal tissue? What's going on here?
Yeah. Well, look, when you reach andropause, whether it's in men or women, we lose the natural production of testosterone in men, estrogen in women. And that causes a lot of, symptoms, ED in men and hot flashes and things like that in women. So what we're finding is it's not just enough to restore the hormones, testosterone or estrogen. We have to restore the natural production of nitric oxide in order to gain the cardioprotective benefits of hormone replacement therapy. Because if you just give hormone replacement therapy that don't fix the enzyme in the lining of the blood vessels, a lot of times you don't improve sexual dysfunction in men and women. So in men, obviously to get an erection, we have to dilate the blood vessels of the sex organs. And that dilation comes from the production of nitric oxide. So erectile dysfunction is a symptom of nitric oxide deficiency. And then in women, what we look at is not just libido and arousal, but orgasm. When we look at the hemodynamic effects of orgasm in women, you mentioned it, you have to have an increase in pressure, clitoral pressure, labial pressure. So that pressure comes from an increase in volume. That volume comes from dilated blood vessels. And that dilation comes from nitric oxide. So if you can't make nitric oxide in the vascular bed of the sex organs, women become anorgasmic. They lose libido. And then if, to the contrary, if we can restore the production of nitric oxide, they get better sensation, enhanced libido, better orgasms. And so again, female sexual arousal disorder is a symptom of nitric oxide deficiency.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I tend to look, of course, and a lot of women are going to be like, oh, nitric oxide serums. And I've seen different, iterations over the course of time for different companies, and then I've seen them go away. And so I'm very curious about, with putting nitric oxide, boosting components into a serum, what kind of challenges do you run up to? How can you maximize increased absorption on the skin? And what kind of things have you discovered in the research to create your serum products?
Well, look, there are a lot of these fly-by-night companies that come and go and try to create nitric oxide products, and they go out of business because their products don't work. And their products don't work because they don't understand the science. And so, I spent 25 years in academia as a professor of molecular medicine, really understanding how the human body makes nitric oxide, what leads to its natural production. And so that gives me a unique set of skills to create product technology that restores and recapitulates nitric oxide production in sickle. So our whole goal, going back 25 years ago, was how do we restore the natural production of nitric oxide? and give nitric oxide at doses that are naturally produced. So when we do that, there are no challenges because we're mimicking what the body would naturally do. So we have an orally disintegrating tablet that produces nitric oxide gas in the oral cavity. And as you mentioned, we make a dual chamber nitric oxide serum because I think it's important to your listeners. Nitric oxide is a gas. It's not a pill you can swallow. It's not something you can just take and hope your body makes it, because that's the basis for the deficiencies. So our dual chamber, we have to keep these components separate, and we mix them together. They come together and generate nitric oxide gas. And then when you apply it to the face or any tissue, it's going to fuse into the tissue. It's going to dilate the blood vessels, and you can actually see it working. The skin's going to turn pink because it's causing a hyperemic response. We're fully oxygenating the tissue. We're dilating blood vessels and restoring normal vascular function.
I think that's really important to explain, and because I kind of jumped past that side of things because unfortunately that's sometimes the problem of being a practitioner and thinking, well, doesn't everybody know that? Let's talk about that for a second, because we're told food is medicine, and people are and I've talked to folks about trying to get more beets in, trying to get more arugula, trying to get more spinach, but the amount of that we would have to eat to boost nitric oxide production in the body is, no one's going to eat that much. And so I would love for you to kind of explain the whole detail of how you actually get nitric oxide production from even the beet powders and things of that nature.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, beets are probably the poorest source of nitric oxide. And so a lot of times the companies with the most expensive marketing budget have the least efficacious products. So don't believe the TV commercials that you're seeing, because they just simply don't understand the science. But there is a mechanism that consumers and your listeners need to understand, that you can get nitric oxide from things like arugula, beets, from your diet. But we know that we need at least 300 to 400 milligrams in a single bolus. And in 2015, we published a paper really trying to answer that question: how much arugula or spinach or celery or broccoli would I need to eat to get that 300, 400 milligrams to produce nitric oxide to normalize your blood pressure or to improve blood flow? And what we revealed was that it depends on where you live and what vegetables you eat. So if you lived in Dallas or Los Angeles, you could eat 5 stalks of celery, get enough nitrate to lower your blood pressure. If you lived in New York, you'd have to eat 30 to 40 stalks of celery. So there's regional differences in the nitrate and nutrient density of the foods we're eating. So it's impossible to predict or know. The other major kind of hurdle is that nitrate is inert in humans. So if you're consuming these vegetables and you don't have the right oral bacteria, you excrete the nitrate in your urine, in your feces, and in your sweat. And so with 2 out of 3 Americans using mouthwash, with 9 out of 10, probably 99 out of 100 people using fluoride in their toothpaste, and then 73% of the municipalities in the U.S. have fluoride in their drinking water, they're killing the bacteria. So you're not going to get any clinical benefit from swallowing a nitrate capsule, like many companies are selling, or trying to eat beets or arugula or spinach. So that's number 2. Then number 3, we need stomach acid in order to finish this process. And 200 million prescriptions for antacids every year. 2 out of 3 Americans are using over-the-counter antacids, and it's completely disrupting nitric oxide production. If you look at the clinical data on PPI use, it's causing a 40% increase in heart attack, stroke, and Alzheimer's. So the point here is it's very difficult to get nitric oxide from your diet because of the oral hygienic practices, because of pharmacotherapy. So we're almost forced to supplement with a product that actually produces nitric oxide for you.
That makes sense. I would love to hear you kind of explain to folks how a product actually helps you produce the nitric oxide, because we can imagine these things, but because of your scientific nature and background in studying this, you're going to explain it so much better than me. So I'm really personally going to probably clip this part so I can repeat it to people, because my explanation just always gets in the weeds. So please help us.
Well, look, there's 2 ways the human body makes nitric oxide. There's an enzyme in the lining of the blood vessels called nitric oxide synthase. And this enzyme takes L-arginine, which is a semi-essential amino acid, through a very complex 5-electron oxidation reaction, produces nitric oxide gas. Then we get L-citrulline as a byproduct. So the problem is, the older we get, the less functional that enzyme becomes. And we call that endothelial dysfunction. We've lost the ability to utilize arginine to make nitric oxide. But we're never out of arginine. Right? So it makes no sense to supplement arginine, because that would be like putting gas in a car with a blown up engine. Your problem is not you're out of fuel, you've lost the ability to utilize that. So that's number one. Then number two, we talked about this redundant pathway of using nitrate from the diet, but we've talked about the limitations of that. So all the beet products on the market don't provide any nitric oxide benefit because of the things we discussed. And furthermore, most of the beet products on the market don't even have any detectable nitrate or nitrite in them. So these are what we call dead beets. We've used them as placebos in our clinical trial. And then some people are telling you to take these capsules of beet powder, and they just don't understand the math. Because even if you had a concentrated beet powder, say, 3 to 5% concentrated in nitrate, you would have to consume 3,000 to 5,000 milligrams, or 3 to 6 grams, and yet you only get 700 milligrams in a capsule. So these companies telling you to take 3 capsules of this beet powder, it's ludicrous. And it would be humorous if it wasn't dangerous, because it's disingenuous. And then they're putting, a little bit of beet in a gummy or a chew and telling you it's nitric oxide.
Yeah.
The numbers don't work, because these companies don't understand the science. They're out there trying to take advantage of a growing market, expanding market, and they're interested in making money and selling the cheapest product they can. It doesn't work. It can't work.
This is such a problem in the natural medicine space, and it's one of them that it's made me kind of getting frustrated with, what do I recommend? How do I do this? How do I know? And this is when I like to use a podcast to be able to interview folks like you, because now I have a face, a name, and I can troubleshoot better there. Now, in terms of some of the surprising things that you've seen about nitric oxide, I would love to hear, even your own story. Any wild, you're like, wow, I did not expect it to help with this or that. Let's talk about those kind of fun things.
Well, I always talk about the study we published in 2011 in a pediatric patient, a 15-year-old kid at Texas Children's Hospital, who was born with a very rare genetic disorder. And for 10 years, he suffered from severe hypertension, what we call resistant hypertension. He was put on 4 different medications, and he presented to Texas Children's Hospital in the Pediatric Intensive Care Unit in 2010. And his blood pressure was 210 over 115. So this was a critical situation for this kid. He was at risk for stroking. And so we had understood this when we modeled this in the research lab, that it was a symptom of nitric oxide deficiency. And so we dosed this kid with our nitric oxide releasing lozenge. Within 4 hours, his blood pressure came down to 130 over 80. And this was remarkable, because I had 8 different physicians in the room with me, from a geneticist, a pediatric cardiologist, nephrologist, all these specialists. And we watched in real time his blood pressure come down. And we didn't change this kid's genetics. He still had the inborn error metabolism. But just giving nitric oxide to dilate the blood vessels normalizes blood pressure, getting him out of the pediatric intensive care unit. And then furthermore, within 5 days, his kidney disease resolved. He was no longer spilling protein in the urine. And within 5 months, it completely resolved his heart disease. This 15-year-old kid had a heart twice the size of a normal 15-year-old. Within 5 months, he had normal heart size and normal heart function. And his cognition improved. He started beating his dad in chess. We published that in the American Journal of Human Genetics in 2011. To me, that was the most remarkable, really profound impact we had on this kid, because the doctors were really out of bullets. They had nothing else to treat him with.
Wow. So who thought of it? Were you involved in the case in the first place? It sounds like you were there. Were you involved?
I was involved. The clinicians at Texas Children's Hospital approached me when I was at UT Medical School in Houston, the Institute of Molecular Medicine. And really the beauty of the Texas Medical Center is you've got clinicians who collaborate with basic scientists to try to understand kind of complex medical cases. And in this case, they couldn't understand these collateral symptoms based on his diagnosis. So they brought me into the mix to try to help them understand these collateral symptoms. And then obviously we figured it out, and we published a very important paper in Nature Medicine in 2010 where we solved the riddle of this condition. And then once we understood kind of mechanistically what was going on, then and only then could we start to develop rational therapies for them. So it was a team effort, which is what it should be.
Yeah. I would love to see this, across the board. It would be so fabulous. Now, have you heard from this kiddo? Do you know what happened since we're now 10 plus years past that date?
Now, I still keep in touch with him and his family. PBS came to the medical center and did a special on us called Healing Quest. We talked about his mother started crying because she said this saved her son's life. And, it allowed us to go to the National Institute of Health, and we got, millions of dollars in funding to further investigate this in this rare genetic disorder. But yeah, I still keep in touch with them. The physicians at Texas Children's Hospital still see him periodically just as checkups. He continues to take our product technology, and that's the only thing that's managing his blood pressure and keeping him healthy.
I was going to ask, does he still have to take it? I mean, that's a great, this is a great segue, because yes, I've seen the data where, we decline on nitric oxide production, and I've seen the exponential data like over 40 or whatnot. But my curiosity is, I think a lot of people with supplements in particular, because we're so used to medications, we take a medication for a time frame and then we're off, or, do I need this for life? How does it work? Like, what do you personally recommend if someone's just everyday Joe, doesn't have a blood pressure issue, someone who just wants to health optimize?
Yeah, I tell people there's only two people in the world who need nitric oxide. There's the sick who want to get well, and then there's the healthy who don't want to get sick. So if you fall within one of those two, it's a good idea to be proactive and take it prophylactically. For me personally, I've been taking it when I first made these discoveries probably 20 years ago. This nitric oxide, I take it not because I need it, it's because I don't want to need it. But what we understand about physiology and medicine is that if the food you eat is replete in nutrients and you're not exposed to the outside toxins, then you give the body what it needs, the body heals itself. But the problem is, since the 1940s, there's been surveys since the 1940s, the food grown in America has 76% less nutrients in 2010 than it did in the 1940s. So the point is, the food that we eat is nutrient depleted. And then you've got herbicides, pesticides, you've got environmental toxicants, you've got 5G that creates a frequency that's disrupting a lot of biochemistry and enzymatic reactions, including nitric oxide production. And so you almost have to take a daily nitric oxide just to dilate the blood vessels, keep the inflammation at bay, and to maintain optimal circulation.
It makes sense. And if you look at the trajectory of aging, and now I've been in the practice long enough where I've started to see folks who had normal blood pressure, it starts to go up with age. And then we have folks like my dad who's going to be 90, and he's had a quadruple bypass, all these different things. And he's asking, what can I do? Because he doesn't feel great on the blood pressure meds. And many people have a cough. Many people will try multiple and nothing seems to work. This seems to be, something to logistically think about when that's
Yeah. Look, we know 50% of the patients that are given antihypertensive medications don't respond with an improvement in blood pressure. I mean, that's indisputable clinical data. And when we look at the class of medications used to treat hypertension, they're ACE inhibitors, it's called angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors. There's ARBs, angiotensin receptor blockers, calcium channel blockers, or really bad docs will give patients beta blockers, sometimes diuretic to just unload the volume. And so what we're finding is that these drugs don't work because their hypertension is not due to renin-angiotensin. It's not due to calcium dysregulation. It's due to a nitric oxide deficiency. So if we give nitric oxide, we dilate the blood vessels. And what I say is nitric oxide fixes the physics problem of hypertension. Because we all have a finite amount of blood pumping through the pipes. And if we lose nitric oxide, we have smaller blood vessels, smaller pipes, increased resistance. And if you remember back from your high school physics, pressure equals volume times resistance. So the volume stays the same, resistance goes up because of constriction, pressure goes up. So now the same volume, we decrease resistance by dilating the blood vessels, pressure comes down. And it's really that simple. So then you have to ask yourself, or ask the patient, why are you nitric oxide deficient? Do you use fluoride in your toothpaste? Are you using mouthwash? Are you taking antacids? When you address those three things, you bring them back 30 days later, the blood pressure is normal, and now you can wean them off prescription medications.
Makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense. I'm glad you outlined that of things to look at. That helps folks to really kind of nail it down and go, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So
it's really obvious. It's been obvious to me for 20 years, but yet most clinicians don't understand this because it's not part of their therapeutic armament.
No, it's not. And I don't think that I would have really understood it because if I look back at my training, and granted, it's been a few years since I was in school, but I don't remember, other than in physiology, talking about nitric oxide, but not using it as much. And granted, I'm a naturopath, so we talked about herbs and we talked about boosting circulation and really drivers. So things like ginkgo and things like, tonquai and different herbs. So I'm like, well, I could see how those would be a great adjunct to using nitric oxide supportive therapies.
For sure. It's a huge problem. I taught in medical school for a number of years, and it's not part of the curriculum. I taught a course called the molecular basis of cell signaling, but it was really only the MD PhD students. We talked about nitric oxide and signal transduction and activation of second messenger systems, but the general medical school class doesn't get this education. And yet, so if they're not taught it, how can they use it in diagnosis and treatment?
No, that's, a lot of what I've had to learn is on my own after school and having the podcast. I do this, yes, guys, just as much for me as for you, because it helps me to really understand, what's going on here. Now, of course, I get asked a lot, back to I mentioned before, about skincare. And, can we kind of ditch the Botox and all the things if we use nitric oxide instead, because we're working on our natural abilities to enhance skin? And then I also will get the question about hyperpigmentation. So all the dark spots, all of like the liver spots. Have you guys done any research on seeing if that'll reduce liver spot production over time in the damaged tissue?
Well, the difference about what we do, whether it's our drug company where we're developing FDA-approved drugs, or our consumer products division, is we put our products through the same rigor as drug therapy. Most supplement companies, most skincare companies don't do this. And why don't they do it? Number one, it's very expensive. And number two, their products typically don't work to move the needle on clinical relevant endpoints. So I think we have 5 or 6 published clinical trials on our skincare product. But what we're finding is that it opens up the blood vessels, it improves oxygenation, it improves collagen deposition, improves hydration, hyperpigmentation, kills the bacteria in the pustules for patients with acne, incredible scar remediation. What else? Mobilizes stem cells. So our whole philosophy is, look, if you give the body what it needs, the body heals itself. The human body is regenerative by nature. Sometimes we just got to get out of the way. But certainly it's a viable and much safer alternative than Botox. I think it's creative how these companies who are doing this, they make this acronym, or really an acronym, but they shorten the word. But Botox is botulism toxin. It's a toxin. And why anybody in their right mind would intentionally put a toxin, a known toxin, a deadly toxin in their body is beyond my understanding.
I agree with you. I even saw in an esthetician's office something like, have you had your toxin today? And I'm like, yeah, probably 80,000 of them, and I'm not putting more in. And I'm like, how do we even turn this into marketing? This just, it's mind blowing to me. But it's one of those things that I know women are like, I won't give up my Botox. And I'm like, all right, well, maybe we work on some stuff in between, because back to the circulation thing, I'm always like, this is circulation. We, by no means everyone can see all my marks. I love the sun. But how can we help counter this in a way that we're not injecting ourselves? Oh, so comical. Us ladies, we're kind of nutty.
Well, sometimes.
I won't put you on the spot there. I won't put you on the spot. I'm saying it for myself, of course. Now, last but not least, one of the things I'm going to get, because I did go on, in my practice some years ago, I got a hold of some samples of the little pads that you test with your tongue for looking to see your nitrates, I think it was. And then you hold it together, and then you see the levels. Is this real? Did I get hyped? Like, is this a way to actually tell us anything? Like, are we actually able to tell if we've repleted our nitric oxide using this thing to see if we're taking enough?
Well, let me give you the history and the origin story of those test strips. I was the person who developed those test strips 15 years ago. When I was still at the University of Texas Health Science Center, Houston, I filed patents through the university. And because that's old chemistry, it's called the grease reaction. So what we're doing is we put an acidified sulfanilamide on there, and it reacts with nitride and forms this nasal compound that turns pink. It absorbs at 540 nanometers. And so we thought at the time that would give us kind of a dosimeter of nitric oxide production. Because when nitric oxide is produced, it's oxidized to inorganic nitrate, it's put in our salivary glands. We have the right bacteria to convert the nitrates to nitrate. So these are not nitric oxide test strips. So go back, I abandoned the patents back in 2012. So when you abandon the patents, now any company can manufacture those and sell them. So they were piggybacking on our initial thoughts and still use them. But I don't use them personally, and my companies don't use them anymore. And the reason I don't is because there's too many false positives. And what we're finding is you can light up that test strip if you have an active oral infection. And it could be a symptomatic or asymptomatic oral infection. And so we have the people come in, a 50-year-old, overweight, hypertensive patient with diabetes and erectile dysfunction. We test him with the test strip, and he lights it up like a Christmas tree. And he goes, oh, well, I'm good on nitric oxide. He had all the clinical hallmarks of nitric oxide deficiency, but he's lighting up this test strip. And so then it made me think, what's going on? So we send him to a dentist, we do a 3D CT cone beam, and he's riddled with infections. Root canal, you didn't even know it. It's an asymptomatic dental infection. And so what's happening is that acute immune response in the mucosas activating nitric oxide production. We're picking up nitrite in the saliva, but systemically he's completely devoid. And so it's giving people a false sense of security. And really what these test strips are measuring is the presence or absence of the oral bacteria. So I don't use them anymore. These companies, there's several companies out there using them. It's a good engagement tool, and that's what we were using them at. But again, these companies who do not understand the science can't explain to you what you're measuring. They're calling it nitric oxide test strips, and it's not.
Yeah. That's kind of how I played with it at first, because, if you get something free, why not? I'm going to play with it. Yeah. And so I decided, well, I want to play with it. And it worked great for a minute, but obviously it's something, it's funny. Over the 18 years, that's the things I keep in the practice and the things that, I don't, it's very telltale. And so.
Yeah, let's stick with what works, right?
Exactly.
And try new things.
And so looking at what you've got, I'm like, this is something we definitely want to share with our clients. We definitely want to share all of your research, because when I was looking on your website, I'm like, wow, there's so much here that I could never, even read in a couple months. I'm going to have to, dive in. So let's share with folks a little bit more on how to find you, a little bit more on your research, and of course, how to find your products, because we're going to put that in the podcast notes at drjkrauseND.com.
My objective is education and awareness, and to communicate the science that I've spent the past 25 years, discovering and the innovations we brought forward. So I encourage people to subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's Dr. Nathan S. Bryan, Nitric Oxide. I just published my 6th book. It's called The Secret of Nitric Oxide, Bringing the Science to Life. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold. And follow me on Instagram, Dr. Nathan S. Bryan. LinkedIn, I'm on PubMed. I've published over 100 peer-reviewed papers in the scientific medical literature. And then for those interested in consumer products, it's n101.com. That's the letter N, number 1, letter O, number 1.com.
Well, thank you for putting all that info out. The YouTube, yes, I could geek out very, very hard there. Now, of course, I have one last question, just kind of for kicks. What does S stand for?
S in my middle name?
Yeah.
Nathan Scott. I have 3 first names.
Gotcha.
That's right.
Hey, some people call that power names. That's good. It's good.
Well, what I found is that people have stolen my identity, and we're using drnathanbryan.com to redirect people searching for me to competitive websites. So I've made it intentional to put the S in there so that I own the domain and the URL, and to discriminate from these people trying to, monetize, what I've been doing.
Oh, it is so sad. I hear this over and over again for folks, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't want to know your middle name just so that we could differentiate a little bit. Because at the end of the day, it's all about helping folks sleuth out who's legit, who's not. And this is where I definitely find those things to be important.
Yeah,
I
well,
know
look,
that
there's a lot of companies out there that are, deceptive. They don't understand the science. You've got tech CEOs who have no science background out there talking about nitric oxide. It's just, it's really, it's funny. But I take it lightly, but it's a very serious condition because, I hear all the time that people they say, Nathan, you talk about nitric oxide and how important it is. Nitric oxide doesn't work for me. And they go, well, tell me. They go, well, I've been taking this beef product that I saw advertised on TV, and it hasn't helped my blood pressure, it hasn't helped my sexual function, and so it doesn't work. Nitric oxide, that product doesn't work. So that product failed you, that company failed you. And that could kill an entire industry. As we're developing these technology into prescription drugs through the FDA, if people and the public get the notion that nitric oxide isn't important or doesn't work, it creates an insurmountable hurdle to get safe and effective drugs and product technology approved. So these companies have to be responsible and stop promoting beets or these beet products as nitric oxide, because they're not. They don't work because they can't work because these companies don't understand the science.
And I have heard that. I'm so glad you mentioned. I mean, I've heard it over and over again, and that's what people think. And my husband brought home something he heard on a podcast and was like, "Hey, try this beet powder." I'm like,
save your money.
It's so much money too for these things. It does make me cringe, and it's why I'm doing this. I want people to hear all of what's legit. Now, in terms of like FDA and all that, I know that this process can take a long time. What do you expect in terms of timeline for folks to look at prescription-based items out there?
I've been at this for a while. We had a drug in phase 3 clinical trials for COVID, and we established safety of that oral formulation. So now we've got a drug. We're moving into phase 3 clinical trials for patients with ischemic heart disease. And we'll start that drug study probably first quarter of next year, in the next several months. And it's a very simple study. It's a 30-day study proving we can prolong exercise-induced aging without tolerance. So if things go as we expect, I would expect we would file our drug application end of next year and hopefully have a drug approved and on the market by early 2027. And then we've got a drug for Alzheimer's we're developing, designing the clinical trials now. That's a little bit bigger, more capital-intensive study, but I expect within probably 2 to 3 years we'll have that clinical trial finished. And then I'm making a topical drug for diabetic ulcers and non-fatal wounds. And I think probably within 3 years we'll have that completed. But, these are big-time projects. I've been very intentional about. I've bootstrapped this and funded this myself for the most part. But, these drug studies take tens of millions of dollars in many years. And, in the process of raising capital, but I've turned down money from private equity, from venture capital, because I will never abdicate what we're trying to do to an outside firm that would gain control. I'm not building it to sell it, so I'm not interested in private equity or venture capital money. I'm building it to do the right thing and to make sure that everybody around the world has access to safe and effective product technology.
Awesome to hear. That's awesome to hear, because at this day and age when we're seeing different companies, come up, then boom, they're sold within, a couple of years after they make some money, boom, they go, and then things happen, or companies, supplement companies.
Yeah, and then they show the technology. What we do is extremely disruptive. And it's not outside the scope of imagination that a big pharma, $1 billion company would come in, pay me $1 billion, and then sell the technology, because it's going to disrupt their market share.
Yeah.
But I'm not for sale.
Good to know. That speaks volumes. And definitely in terms of choices that I make, things that I recommend to folks, and just definitely how I'm going forward in this, because unfortunately, from where this industry started, even over 20 years ago when I got into to the naturopathic medical school till now, I mean, it's disgusting what's happened.
Yeah. No, I think the time, look, integrity and honesty and trust rules the day. And so I predict as we continue to advance the science and start calling out these companies that are putting forth these products that don't work because they can't work, and they'll go away, and the cream will rise to the top. And, there'll be a flash in the pan, but it's not sustainable because of what we're doing, what your podcast and reaching people outside mainstream media. Consumers become informed and aware, and very discriminate, so they can make educated, informed decisions. And get the truth out there, and the science wins. People will no longer buy from these companies, and they'll be forced to do something different, go out of business.
It makes sense. It makes sense. Now, of course, you kind of dropped the bomb on the diabetic ulcer topical, and there's one more question I have to ask, because I am one of those folks, I see a lot of folks who are really sensitive to taking things orally. And topical tends to be sometimes more of a preference because nervous system fear, let's just put it that way, of taking things and having reactions. Can you have a nitric oxide product that you just take topically instead of orally and replete at the same manner?
Probably not, because you have to understand nitric oxide is a gas.
Yeah.
And there's a limit of diffusion of the nitric oxide that we're applying topically. It's only going to diffuse a couple of millimeters into the tissue. But the point is, it's not going to reach the conduit, the resistance, arterioles, and arteries. It'll dilate and recruit capillaries and dilate superficial blood vessels. But yeah, probably not. Because what we're developing in terms of a topical drug, it has to have a local effect and only affect where it's applied. And so if it's a topical that becomes systemic, then that's a different class of drug therapy.
Yep, makes sense. Makes sense. So those of you out here who are thinking like you could use get this serum for your face, it's not going to get in internally. You got to use both.
That's right. Now we do it's inside out because we want to dilate the blood vessels internally. That's the point of the lozenge, and we want to hit it, topically and superficially. So we're hitting the skin and the body inside and out.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Wow. My mind is blown. I'm going to I know you have 6 books, and definitely, folks, I will put all of them at drjkraussend.com. I have them listed out so you can see all of them, because it's just such fascinating information, and what I have been able to dive into, it just blows my mind. Thank you again so much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. Well, good luck with that documentary today, and we will look forward to putting this podcast out really soon.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to stop. Hey, Health Junkies. I'm asked all the time what brands I use, from supplements to toothpaste and clothing. 90% of the stuff that's sent to me to test out doesn't pass my standards of being owned by the original owner, at least family members, or at least friends together, and especially love companies that have. Hey, Health Junkies, I'm asked all the time about what brands, from supplements to toothpaste to clothing, that I use. 90% of the items that are sent to me to test out do not pass my standards. You might be wondering, what are your standards? Well, I like companies that are small companies. They're still family owned, or at least owned by the original owners or someone from that group, to maintain the standards. Now, I also love a company with a great story of how the business came to be. I like things that are high quality, non-toxic, as well as transparency. Major big deals. Now, above all, I love things that work. So made in the US is definitely a major bonus, but while I have worked with a couple of different clothing companies over the years, I realize that these companies sometimes need support in other countries to get off the ground, and it's really important about how they treat their companies, sometimes more than being 100% made in the US. Nevertheless, I'm working on putting together a list of companies that I like their products, and what they stand for, along with discounts for you to try them out. Full disclosure, I do make a little commission if you buy any of the items on the page, and this money goes back to helping me keep producing this podcast. If you're curious about a few of my favorite apparel companies for life's adventures, check out the website, thehealthpodcast.codeadx.me. That's thehealthfixpodcast.codeadx.me. And if you decide to buy anything, tell them I sent you by entering the code HEALTHFIX. All together, one word. All right. Thank you so much for watching the podcast. You have a great day, whatever you're doing. Hey, fellow health junkie. Thanks for listening to the Health Fix podcast. If you enjoyed tuning in, please help support me to get the word out about the podcast. Subscribe, rate, and review, and just get that word out. Thanks again for listening.